to the Wednesday LiveStream. Today, our topic is let me change my title here. When my tab doesn't match my tuning, what am I going to do? So, this is a mountain dulcimer focused conversation today. Um, there are a couple of things I want to let you know about. I'll also remind us at the end of the time today. But let me share my screen. The Redwood Dulcimer Day is coming up. And this is welcome to August. The third weekend in August, August 20th and 21st, is going to be the 21st year of the Redwood Dulcimer Day. The featured artists from outside are Lois Hornbostel and Ahukai Tevis, who are coming from North Carolina by Zoom. And Dusty Thorburn and Jessica Como and Ron Beardsley, Deborah Morris, Neil Hellman, who is the host, Kevin Roth, Laura Devine Burnett, and Janet Herman are all teaching mountain dulcimer. Peter Tomrup and I are both teaching hammered dulcimer. I think Peter might also be teaching a mountain workshop. The hammered dulcimer has been a part of this festival for 3 years now. 3 years ago, I taught a day of classes, and that was the first time they'd added it. And then after that, Peter and I both taught last year. So we're excited that we get to do that. And then this weekend, let's pick a different tab. The Kindred Dulcimer Gathering Fest. Kindred Gathering is something that happens. Let me make that a little bit bigger. And oops, that's not helping you, is it? There we go. It's happening on Zoom. This is a gathering. This is the 47th year of this one. It's one that's more of an anarchic festival, but it's all on Zoom, and that's the information. And it starts on Friday night with a song swap. There are workshops scheduled for Friday, but this is the kind of festival where when you show up, if you want to teach a workshop, you say, I'll teach this workshop over here, and people can join you if they're interested. If they're not, well, there won't be anybody at your workshop. So it's a very easy flowing come and go kind of thing rather than a highly scheduled thing, which is the way most other workshops are. But that's happening this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There's a song swap on Friday night. There's a concert. You just sign up and say, I want to share 2 songs on Saturday night. And then there's a Sunday opportunity for some going home kind of music, uplifting music. And it's being hosted this year by Catherine Lamar and Jim Burrell. And they're putting all those things together. So now on to the topic of today. What happens when my tab doesn't match my tuning? This was a request from somebody last week, which is, I love it when we have these great ideas of what we can be talking about. Let me type in here, when my tab doesn't match my tuning. So this is a great example of how do we do this? What do we do when that's the case? I have put together and published many books over my time with dulcimers. And one of the things that I found out, and I'm going to change my view here. This is the first big book I published, Dulcimer Friendly Worship, The Season of Advent. And I did things in DAA, EAA, and DAC, some different tunings, so DAG, minor mode tunings. But I did the same thing for the second volume, which is Evening Prayer. And people would look and say, I don't play that tuning, and they'd send the book back. And I'm thinking, well, why don't you just adapt it? They didn't want to. So here's what I had to do. when I added these yellow pages, so everything would be in, this is all major mode tuning, and the white pages are all DAA tuning, the yellow pages are all DAD tuning. So it's two books in one, and both people, you can have people tuned to different things playing with each other. So that's what happened when the book person puts it together for you and makes it possible. For this, which was my first book, what I ended up having to do was create, here's what I did. I created a supplement that then, that first had to be slipped into the back of the book, and then here we go. Everything that was in the front of the book in DAA is now in DAD again. So we have two different ways in the same book to do that, and they're numbered the same. So it's a little confusing, but that's what happens when the publisher does that for you. In my Another Jig book, what I did was put on this side, this is all Celtic music, so let's use the example of the swallowtail jig. On this side, it's DAA with a capo. On this side, it's DAD with a capo. So the pages are facing each other, but it means that twice, you get twice as many possibilities in the book, but less tunes. And when I did these selections from the Southern Harmony, for example, on this side, this is a minor mode tune, Samanthra, which mentions the word mountain or dulcimer in it, which, dulcimer players love. On this side, it's in DAD. On this side, it's DAD. DAC. On this side, it's DAD with a capo, making it effectively EBE. So what we're going to talk about today is what happens when this is the case for us. How do we navigate this? One thing is to complain to the bookmaker, which is what happened. And maybe they'll be able to, maybe they'll have the time, the money to publish a new book that has the things in it. No one can guess. Jim, you're right. It's a different topic. It doesn't match my timing. Or develop some skills on the fly so that I am not stuck when it doesn't match what I am in, what's the tuning I'm in, or the tuning I prefer, because those are different things. Now, I think you've seen before when I've talked about the dulcimer pledge, and let me share my screen here. What happens when your tablature doesn't match your tuning? Your first choice is to retune so that your dulcimer matches the tablature. Now, some people are scared of this. Some people just don't have experience with it and are afraid they're going to lose all understanding they have. And this is why I've heard Sam Edelston say he didn't want to completely relearn the whole dulcimer. That's why he got as many frets as possible, which is a chromatic dulcimer. So that let him be working on one instrument with everything in the same places, but he also has to avoid a bunch of frets in order to play. So it's like playing guitar on your lap, and now you're avoiding frets instead of just going to the next one. That's a choice he made. So legitimate choice. So one choice is to retune to match the tablature. Another one is to change instruments and play a chromatic one so that you have all the notes you need. Another one is to simplify the tablature. So what I want to do here is compare some tunings. So these are very common tunings that we have talked about in our live stream and that get used a lot in the dulcimer world at this point. So we have DAA, which is a 155 tuning, and we have DAD, which is a 158 tuning, and a DGD, which is a 515 tuning. So what happens when I have music that's written for DAA and my tuning is DAD? And that's a good question. I'm going to address that, Talon, after I get through this. Okay, so thank you. Keep putting up your questions there so that I make sure I address them. The thing I notice about all these three tunings is there's doubled notes in the tuning. So here A and A are the same. Here D and D are the same. Here D and D are the same. The melody on the A string can be played on the middle string, right? They're the same pitches, same frets. So by the same token, if I'm playing music that's written for DAA, when the melody is on the A string, I could play it on the middle string of a dulcimer that's tuned to DAD. I don't have to retune my dulcimer. I just play those melody notes on the middle string. That's why I'm saying simplify the tablature. Don't try to play the whole arrangement. Work on the melody and put it on the string that you can use it with. Now, what happens if I have a piece of music that's written for DAD, but my instrument is tuned to DAA? Well, I have two Ds on my instrument, right? I have one D here. I can just take whatever is written for this one and put it on the bass string, and I'm going to have the melody I'm looking for. There's a lot of tunes where that actually works very well. The difference for DGD, if I have music that's written for D and I try to play it here, my drones are going to sound funny because G doesn't line up with A in the same way, or with D and in the same way that A lines up with D. And that's because this tuning and this tuning are related to each other. We talked about this in a live stream a while back. This is sometimes called reverse Ionian because the melody note or the key tone we're using for everything we're doing is not the bass string. That's why this is not a 1-4-1 tuning. The 1 is in the middle on G. So in that case, whatever I played on the melody string in DAA could be played needs to be played on the middle string. But for the drones to line up, it's going to work better if I take whatever is set for the D on DAD and play it on the middle string, because these are both open notes. So let's go down to the bottom of this handout for a minute. The Ionian scale, the major scale we're used to, and all of these assume no 6.5 fret, starts on the 3rd fret. So let me switch and demonstrate that. I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute in order for that to happen. So if I start on the 3rd fret and walk up and I skip my 6.5 and just go up to 10, that's the melody on the D on the what would be the A string. Now my drones don't line up because this is tuned to DAD, but if I play that on the middle string, so that's why if I had a music that was written in DAA, I could just move and play on the melody, the middle string, and it'll work. That's the Ionian mode, or the major scale. Now with the addition of the 6.5 fret, that makes it possible to start at 0. If I don't have a 6.5 fret, when I start at 0 and go up to, what I'm doing is playing the Mixolydian scale. Because I have a 6.5 fret, I could change my 6 to give me what the scale, which on a historical dulcimer is only going to be available here. Now, the other two that I want to call attention to move us into the minor place, and the Mixolydian is called modal quite often. So let me share my screen again. The Aeolian scale starts on the 1st fret. And my drones are not lining up with that right now, which is why people would retune or put a capo on for that scale to work. The Dorian, or the mountain minor scale, is going to start at the 4th fret. And I'm going to usually tune to DAG for the modes to, or the drones to line up for that one. But this is where the scales naturally start. And if we're going to be starting from 0 and we have retuned in some way, when I start at 0, If I don't use the 6.5 fret, I'm going to have mixolydian of G. I'm going to have mixolydian of A. I'm going to have mixolydian of D. If I use the 6.5 fret, I can have ionian of D at 0. I can have ionian of G, ionian of A, all at 0. Now, are there any questions about that right now? Let's see. Let's look at what you're talking about. Yes, Doug, it's not a 1-4-1 tuning. It's a 5-1-5 tuning because the tonic is in the middle. Correct. The melody is going to work for you because when you're tuned to D, D, E, F sharp, G is at the 3rd fret. So your DA tablature is going to give you all of the melody things you need. You'll just have to adjust your chord positions to match that tuning. And that's also true, Doug. I see that you're needing to rap because we think literally. I had a student in one of my classes this week say that their orientation is very pitch specific. So it's very difficult for them to transfer from one place to the other. Fortunately, they're a hammer dulcimer player, and it's easier to see when I move from one place to the other. The pattern works. On the mountain dulcimer, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. Words, speaking. That's a challenge some days, right? Okay. The one other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the specific questions that were being asked right here, I want to share my screen again, is that if I retune to DAC, which is a very common retuning, what happens when I tune to DAC, this is a whole step down from this D right here. It's not C sharp, which would be the expected note to be in the major scale. It's a C natural. And that means that when I go a whole step away from the 0 fret, I get a D. So when I put my finger down at the 1st fret, I get DAD again. But now I'm starting at this scale because I'm starting on the 1st fret. And that gives me some notes that I didn't have before. D, E, F natural, I didn't have. G, A, B flat. If I have a B 6 plus, then I'm going to get a B natural, as well as a C natural and D, which gives me the Aeolian scale. Now, if I play the 6.5, I can get the Dorian scale. And I'm going to do that looking at the dulcimer instead of, here's the Aeolian scale. This time I'm going to use 6.5 instead of 6. So when I retune my melody string to DAC, for the first time, I have a tuning out of the ones we've been looking at that has 3 different pitches. There's no double pitch in this tuning. And that means that whatever I play on the melody string, I may or may not find the same notes on the other 2. The other thing is this DNA is the same as the DNA of DAD and DAA. So nothing has changed on the other 2 strings. And that means I just think about, and this is maybe where some people are saying, I don't want to think about it. But one of the things I notice is that I can do this. I've got E's here. I've got an F sharp in the bass, F natural in the melody. I'm probably not going to ever double for that. But then I got G's, A's. I got a B natural and a B flat. And C. I got a C sharp and a D. So places that I would go for the noodling harmonies that I would want to do are going to be in a different place now. Doug, yeah, you have a way that has worked very well for you for all the things you're doing. I wouldn't say that you're learning it but I wouldn't think of it as instead of, but I would think of it as like you got a bonus pack. That, if you're into the card games where you have the basic game, you can buy a bonus pack which makes the game have more to it. That's kind of what I would say this way, and then it's a game, so we're playing, right? Okay, now let's get to okay, so it, you need more like a math problem, right? So if we're playing, if the tablature is for DAD and we want to start at the third fret, we just add 3 to everything. And I don't know if that's going to work exactly, because my drones won't. If I just want to play the single melody string, that'll work, but my drones may not work. But now let's get more to your question about a baritone, which is typically, I have some students that play in GDG, so I have to retune. The thing to remember when you're playing a baritone that's typically fifth, it's tuned below the standard, is the open A on a baritone is the exact same pitch as the middle string on a standard instrument. And then in order for this to be a 158 tuning, we've got 1 on the bottom, we've got 5 in the middle, so it's an E and an A on the melody string. What some people do, and I think this is what you're talking about, is they'll retune their middle string down to D, and now their melody string is the same as a mountain dulcimer that's standard. Their middle string is the same as the bass string of a standard, and they've got an A on the bottom. Now, your brain may be saying, "What's going on here?" But ADA is the 515 tuning again, so it's analogous to GDG or DGD, but ADA is the same analogous idea. It's kind of a minor third, Jim, about tuning. So I will often retune FAC, and that means my D has to go up through D sharp and E to F. So, right. So what you're doing now, when you take a baritone that's tuned to DA to ADA, is you've got the D string in the middle. You can either play your melody tablature for your standard dulcimer on the middle string, which sounds the same as the bass here. In an ensemble, it's going to give you an octave lower than whatever the standard people are playing. You can, if you've got a piece of music that's doing this. This is D to A. I can do, because these notes are lower, they may or may not work with that close of a harmony. But whatever I did here, I can take and put on the middle string and just let the high string ring. Or I could do it backwards, because the outside strings have the same name. Exactly. That's right, Talon. And so one way to take the music that's written for DAD people and play them in a baritone is to retune ADA and move everything over. Okay, thank you. And that's going to give you a way to play. Now, the other thing in this case that some people do is they'll take their baritone and put a capo on at the 3rd fret. And I need to push it harder. And now I've got a DAD instrument with my open strings, but I just lost my whole reason for having a baritone. So I can start, because I'm starting at the 3rd fret, I don't need to worry about a 6 or 6.5. I do have to worry about my what's the 6.5 here, but it's a 4.5. I just don't ever play that. That's weird. And when we put a capo on it, we don't renumber. So I could take my baritone, tune it AEA, put a capo on, it's going to produce the same as DAD. I can play all my music that way, and it's going to work. However, I lose the benefit of these lower tones, which is why I got the instrument. So the other thing to do is to have AEA music that is written for your ensemble. So when I've done many of my hymn arrangements, the dulcimer orchestra arrangements that I have, I will, when I can, I will do them both. And this is that whole tuning thing. I will have them written so that we could have a quartet of standard mountain dulcimers and everybody can play and you're going to hear all the notes. The tones will not be as rich because everybody's in the same register. It's like having a whole bunch of altos do 4-part harmony. They don't, you have to write it so it's tight. But if I have a ginger, which is pitched higher, I have a standard, which is more like the alto. I've got a baritone, which is more like the baritone or the tenor. And I have a bass, which they have different timbres. And I'm going to have the alto and the bass. It's like recorders. The alto and the bass are going to use the same fingering. They're going to be DAD. But the ginger will probably be in GDG and the baritone will be in AEA, so that as we're playing, we're getting all the notes we need, but we're also getting the breadth of timbre and tone. So that's the other thing, is to write the music specifically for different tunings. I did not mention that on this other place. There you go, Doug. Wanting to better understand the fingerboard, so that will help you knowing specific notes and saying the names as you play them, and beginning to think about them, whether you think about them as numbers in that's functional, if they're relating to each other in the same way regardless of tuning, or you think about them pitch specifically, knowing where to go to find the notes you're looking for. Very useful to a skill. And that's what you were talking about with your AAD. You were talking about taking your D and lowering it down to an A, which is quite low and pretty floppy. If I was going to do that, I'd probably want to get a thicker gauge string for my bass string. There isn't a specific, that I'm not aware of anybody who's using that way of tuning as a general rule, but it is possible to do that. And then you'd have an octave A. Now I do have one of my instruments, a Clemmer, that has double melody strings. This, what would be the middle one, or it's also the same as this. Then there's a middle string, then there's a bass string. And what I had Mike do is, groove out the lowest bass string to be a super bass. So it's an octave lower D. So I have D prime, and then I have D, A, D, D. So it's 5 strings, but I've got it laid out so it's 2 Ds, an octave apart on the bottom, the regular A and the regular D. And that gives me some different opportunities to do some things. It's not exactly the same as having a bass dulcimer attached. And I know that Richard Ash at Folkcraft has got his max dulcimer, which is D, A, D, A, D, or something like that. It ends up being like a bass and a standard all together on one fretboard. But I think, in answer to your question, Talon, I think you're writing your own tablature at that point, because that hasn't been a very common thing. So I wouldn't expect that you're going to be able to just find that. Yeah, it ends up there is an argument for that I like. What I like about that kind of an idea, it does sound bagpipey. Because the bagpipe scale is a Mixolydian scale. Yeah, there are 5-string fiddles that let people borrow that note from the viola on a standard violin, which is rich. I'm not sure I understand your specific question, Talon. Is there any tab we can take and start with to rewrite? If you, for the lowering your bass string down to an A, what I like about doing that for bagpipe, simply having all Ds is not the same as bagpipe tuning, because a bagpipe, when I'm starting to scale, uses the Mixolydian scale. So the scale goes from 4 to 11 with a flatted 7, which is the 10th fret. And has the flatted 7 below Do, and that's the ornament of a burl. Is there any tablature you can take to start with? Is there any printed tablature that says AAD? I'm not aware of any. If that's your question, that's a good question. Let me go to Dulcimer Crossing. We have several tablature pages that you can print out there on our free page. Oh, I should let you watch me where I'm going. So let's do that. Here we are on Dulcimer Crossing. If I go home, this is what it looks like. Go to the free section and scroll down to Theory for the Mountain Dulcimer. There's PDF tablature for all these different tunings. What I would do if I was you is I would, this is the one that's going to have the melody. I'd pick this one and I'd print it out and scratch this out and write A. That's what I would do. You could use blank tablature if that's what you're trying to do. If I understand your question. But the key thing here is I'm not thinking. It's actually kind of utilitarian. So the drones are going to work, but it also feels like I've just gone into, when I play DAA or AAD this way, It doesn't quite feel finished in the same way that playing at the 4th fret gives me all A's, or playing at the 1st fret gives me AAE. That feels a little bit at home, but my scale is the Mixolydian scale from 4 to 11. Could also be the Dorian scale. Lord God, mercy on us, Lord God, mercy on us, Lord God, mercy on us, early in the morning. That's kind of fun. Sounds like you better write me an email because I'm not quite getting what you're looking for, Talon. If this isn't that math problem thing, why don't you write me at Steve at Dulcimer Crossing, and we can get into a little more detail than what we're able to do just with the chat stuff here. And our time is up. It's time for me to go. But I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for this question. It's a great and practical question. And I believe there's some good answers for it, as well as it opened up a couple more cans of worms. The best questions do that, right? We'll see you next week. I said I was going to remind you again. Let me share my screen again. I want to do Chrome tabs, and I want to the Redwood Dulcimer Day. There are limited 25 seats in each class, and I know there's still some room in my Hammer Dulcimer classes. The registration deadline is next week, the 13th, so there's a little bit of time. Take a look at that. But also, let's take a look at the Kindred Gathering, which is happening this weekend. And that's what I have for us today. I wish you all the best. Happy adventuring.